And one of the things, if we brought you over to the library, that you would see is just what a complex operation the White House is, the decision making. And of course, it's probably 500 times more complicated now than it was. But the president gets all sorts of, it's amazing. The president gets lists of people to call on a given day. The talking points for those phone calls, individual discrete documents. It's amazing to me in terms of the manpower and woman power that has to be there to do that. The president getting decision points for a certain thing and then checking off approve, disapprove, or choosing option 1, 2, or 3, or whatever. All of these are documenting, but it's to sort of codify, because then other people are going to carry out those decisions. And it's amazing. We think of the cabinet room holding all this power, but then every one of you, if you were a cabinet secretary, you would be controlling an agency of thousands and thousands of people and having to get those decisions out. And actually one of the things I think about, and of course in this election, but in other positions, is the executive experience of actually making a decision. And we have varying levels around the table and varying backgrounds. It's interesting in terms of now we have senators running. Other times there have been governors, in terms of Governor Carter arising, and certainly other governors around the country. But this issue of how to make things happen, because as I look at this election, and Cleves and I were talking about it a little bit over lunch, we're getting a lot of promises now and beliefs, and these are very sincerely held beliefs, whatever they might be. But in truth, whoever is elected will be able to accomplish what Congress passes. In terms of, it isn't just the president just stamping his or her finger, or, fist on the table and saying, I want this. And so then it gets into the congressional negotiation, and of course that's where President Ford excelled so much in terms of his ability. And so I'm looking at this in terms of candidates' knowledge of how to get legislation through, just as they did with this big rescue bill. What compromises are made, how firmly do you hold, or what do you offer, and recognizing that that's the process. So we're right now really focused on the president as if it's a one-person show that determines everything, and it's really so much more complex than that, with lots and lots of players. The cabinet will be factors, the House and the Senate will be factors, and that ability to delegate, to collaborate, which was said earlier, to listen to points of view. Brian?
I don't think anyone said intelligence yet. The ability to grapple with complex issues, to comprehend, to master.
And that's different from just we had knowledge a little bit ago. And that's knowledge of a certain situation or whatever, but the raw intelligence to grasp concepts and then communicate them. Again, it's that ability to translate. You're absolutely right.
And how about an understanding of people?
Very good.
Understanding of human nature in any size organization.
What else? The other thing I'd say, understanding of people, insight into human nature, that kind of thing. Yes, sir?
I think the tying to intelligence, an effective leader needs to be a quick learner, because new situations may arise that are unlike crises that have been experienced before, where standard operating procedures won't necessarily work in this case. So they need to be able to understand whatever crisis or whatever they may encounter in the future and treat it as its own specific incident as opposed to just running through the mill.
Well, in this financial situation is a case in point, that when these guys, especially the two presidential candidates, when they started running, the economy was, oh, well, we would like it to be more thriving than it was. There were generic concerns about the economy, more from one party than the other, but nothing like this. And so all of a sudden, the entire agenda in the debates they've been trying to ask, in each case, well, what will have to be put on the back burner? What will not happen in your term of office because of this situation? And that's the whole point. That the world they will inherit is different from what they started running for 2 years ago, and it's different for all of us. And that means it's a whole different set of situations and let alone the world situation. What blows up tomorrow in a country we haven't thought about in any way, shape, or form, all of a sudden takes up the time in the cabinet room, and that's how other agendas get derailed. Yes.
I was curious that it wasn't up there yet. Sort of the tenacity to work hard, and thinking about situations like you asked the question about what you give up in the stance that you don't have the ability to do everything that you want to do. And I think it's really important in going back to sort of the strategic adjective that we had there. I don't understand, I guess I've never seen it, a strategic plan for the federal government. I mean, we do it in almost every single organization that you have. What are our priorities? These are the things that we absolutely have to accomplish, and what are we investing in? Where do we want to be 10, 15, 20 years down the road? And, obviously we may have to make modifications given the current circumstances, but the strategic plan, I think, is so important because this sort of, pull the fire alarm and trust everything I say is sort of gotten us where we are now. So having a strategic plan and have something to base your values off of, I think, is so important. And I'd really like to see something like that come out of leadership, in almost every leadership position, especially in the White House.
I can comment on that. That's a very good point, and it's tremendously difficult. When I joined the National Archives, and by the way, I should say that this is a federal facility, and I know at the University of Michigan there's a lot of misconception about that because I was on staff and faculty there. But the Ford Library is a part of the National Archives and Records Administration, and my boss is the Archivist of the United States, who's in Washington, and who's been here for maybe 90 minutes in my nearly 4 years on the job, and who's never been at the library at all in his time. But the archive, soon after I came, embarked on a strategic planning process. And I was lucky to be a facilitator to go to some of the other presidential libraries to sort of guide group discussions as they wanted this grassroots effort of what would come out. And then, of course, this was all massaged into a major document. And what we have are sort of all sorts of wonderful, what I'd say almost platitudinous things that are good in terms of management of regional archives, and we will make records available, and we will apply technology, and we will do all these things, and nothing provided financially to do any of those. And that's a common failure in many, many strategic planning processes. It never gets to that next stage. There's the strategy, but then the tactic, and again, the trade-off. What are you going to give up? What's not going to happen? And there's no willingness to wrestle with that. And so part of my reaction is, if it was that hard in an agency the size of the National Archives, which is small relative to some of the other cabinet positions that are represented around this table, that's just it's daunting. But you're absolutely right in terms of where are we going. Maybe another way, and I think that there was some talk about that in last night's debate, of what are the 3 or 4 or 5 issues. That might be another way to get at it. I have to say that when McCain talked about a government freeze, you might not think, Gleaves was talking about the state budget. I'm hearing that and thinking the federal budget and saying, oh, good grief, then I'll never have the staff positions to do whatever. And so that kind of a draconian response, and President Ford dealt with one of that for a time as well. But it's a real challenge in terms of how do you get everybody on that same page. So your point's very well taken. Let me ask you about 2 others we haven't, nobody's mentioned. I find this interesting, or maybe it's a given. We talked about honesty. Integrity, is that the same as honesty, or is that different? Does that belong on this list? Integrity in leaders? Okay. And there's one more, well, there are many, many more. Nobody's mentioned charisma. Where does charisma fit in? Because we often think of that. Well, actually, there are 2 more I want to raise. Does charisma matter?
Well, I think that it does, and this is a discussion that we had in my history class this semester, and it was that a lot of effective leaders have to walk a really thin line, and that is between being an extraordinary character, but also being one of the common people at the same time, and being able to connect with basically commoners and the general public, but there has to be that special quality about them that also puts them in the same league as other leaders and makes them, truly special and ready for the position, I suppose.
You're absolutely right. You've got the world leaders, and then to use the phrase that we're all going to remember from this election, Joe Sixpack, right? the common people, the public, It's a real challenge because everybody, and you could talk different candidates being told they need to connect with a certain audience. I mean, it's really scary. If any of us were doing this, it's really mind-boggling. But that aspect that we want them to be, we want them to have a cup of coffee with us in the local diner or share pancakes or whatever. But then we also want them to be able to negotiate on a world stage, and it's a tremendous challenge. And that's why that comment about from David Brooks about in terms of what we hear, what we believe, and then who is the real person. is one of the factors.